way B2B companies buy software has changed dramatically. Today's B2B buying is a group decision made by multiple stakeholders across departments, roles, and geographies. And buyers have more control over the buying decision now than ever before. They no longer have to talk with a salesperson to get educated on a product or a service. With a wealth of information and resources available to them, many buyers can get far down the line of evaluating solutions without ever needing to talk to sales. And for go-to-market teams, that means a dramatic shift. They must find ways to detect very early when a buying process may be underway. And then they must find ways to meet buyers where they are, which aligns to how they want to evaluate different products. Often this means delivering small pieces of value across the buying journey, tailored to individual stakeholders, even before agreeing to a meeting. The playbooks today are much different than the ones that worked just a few years ago. At the same time, individual lead-based approaches focused on generating MQLs are no longer effective. The terribly low conversion rates of these leads carry a tremendous amount of waste and inefficiency. The future of marketing is about detecting early interest across multiple people and curating content for buying group influencers throughout their journey. So how do you identify the right people in the group? How do you tailor messaging to each one of them? Most importantly, how do you use data to drive meaningful engagement that moves the deal forward? Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Revenue Lounge. I am your host, Randy Likas. In this episode, we will deep dive into how modern marketing leaders are using clean data, intent signals, and ABM to win over buying committees in complex deals and deal cycles. Joining me today is Sydney Sloan. Sydney is the Chief Market Officer at G2. She's a 4-time CMO, board member, and advisor to several software companies, B2B software companies, with decades of experience in driving transformative growth and innovation for high-tech companies. Sydney, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure to be here, Randy.
Super excited to talk with you. So I usually like to start the episode and just have you maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, career journey, and your current role at G2.
So currently I'm the Chief Market Officer, which is an idea that our job is actually to understand the market and bring that market point of view to the company. We just happen to also do marketing, the adjective, but I really like that strategic kind of point of view as the role of the Chief Market Officer. Prior to that, we know each other because of a long stint that I had at SalesLoft. And so 4 years at SalesLoft, I did a little dip in the security industry for a while with a company called Drata. I've worked in content management. I grew up at Adobe doing mostly product marketing, but I've had the good fortune to have a lot of roles in marketing. And that's what I love. I do love the job of marketing. It's never boring. And even today, it's transforming along with everything else because of that 2-letter word of AI. So I'm sure we'll talk about that too.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was going to ask you a question about that Chief Market Officer, because it is a really important distinction. If you think of like traditional CMOs are responsible for driving the marketing function, and I think, as you mentioned, Chief Market Officer drives market strategy. So it's a little bit larger. So I want to just double click on that a little bit more and talk to me a little bit about what you're doing differently in your current role than maybe you did in your prior roles as Chief Marketing Officer.
I don't think much different. I think it's just how I've oriented myself coming from the product marketing background too. But as the way that I like to talk about it is, if the strategy is not clear, if you haven't brought all the market inputs into the strategic equation of go to market, then you can have misalignment at the leadership level. So a lot of it is an alignment exercise and understanding what our growth opportunities are. And so the marketing team can pull that together and facilitate that discussion. And it may end up in, which geographies do we go after? Which partnerships do we want to double down on? Are there new products that we want to develop and build? And that is a leadership team decision, but having someone that is responsible for bringing all of the information to be able to facilitate that discussion and outcome is a role I like to play.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about Forrester. So we both spent time there last week. Fantastic event, one of my favorites. But I'd love to hear from you, as you talked to different revenue leaders, what were some of the key themes that you heard being discussed in the group, and what were your big takeaways from the event?
Well, I think the biggest one was the idea of moving from the buying group to the buying network, which totally makes sense. And so for many years, Forrester has been taking us on that journey of what account-based truly means. and getting aligned around the buying group and how to think about the influencers and buyers and all the people that play that role and how to orchestrate your go-to-market around that, as you did in the introduction. But now they're taking it to that next level where all the other areas that influence the buying group through that network. And so it's everything from your implementation partners or your agency partners, product experts, your peer networks, and where G2 fit was within the influencer network. So your analysts, your peer review sites, and true influencers were definitely part of what influences buying decisions and buyers who are doing their research.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the buying group. So the topic that we want to speak about. So tell me about your experience and maybe in the shift from this legacy individual lead MQL world to a buying group motion, whether it's your direct experience or other marketers. How does that change the way that they need to operate?
Yeah, I've been in enterprise a very long time, so the idea of a buying group is not new to me when you're talking about long deal cycles and many stakeholders involved. But I think one of my favorite aha moments was back in, let's call it 2015, 2016. And I was working in a company called Alfresco, and the SDR team moved into marketing. And there was a question whether or not we should have SDRs. And I'm like, I will quit if not, because we work so hard to create these leads. And if there's no one there to work it and sales reps just cherry pick, what does that mean for the outcome of marketing? So this challenge has been around for a very long time. And one of the things that we discovered is the SDRs were following up on every lead and having various levels of success. We were an open source content management platform, so people could just download a free version and start working with it. But what happened was there were people from the same company in different parts of the world downloading software, and we were having all these individual conversations. And so we created this idea of a smoke report, Amanda Song, shout out, a smoke report, which looked at, hey, there are multiple people from the same company downloading free versions of our software, or open source. Maybe we should prioritize calling them because multiple people shows more interest.
Yep.
And so our SDRs were reoriented not around geographical based leads, but regionally based companies with multiple signals coming from, and it completely transformed how we changed our prospecting. What was cool about it too is that they could say, oh, we've noticed these 3 people have downloaded. Are you working on a project together? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. So it also created an opportunity for these development teams to start realizing that they were all coming to the conclusion that they should use Alfresco. That's 10 years ago. Now we have sophisticated platforms that can identify different people doing research or engaging with all the different signals, from third-party signals on keywords in the internet to second-party signals off sites like G2, and combining that with first-party signals on your website, and really sophisticated people, which I talked to quite a few at Forrester, of how they're really building a data strategy behind the scenes to try and push forward the buying group idea and helping reps identify those accounts. And we can double click on that because I've got 3 layers to unpack from that. But
yeah. So you're right. The idea of a buying group is not new, right? I've been in sales my entire career. You've been in marketing, multi-threading. That's not new. I think what's new, and particularly a challenge for most organizations right now, is how do you operationalize that across different functions, right? So marketing traditionally is responsible for developing leads or running a campaign. Hopefully we get X amount of MQLs out of that, and pass over to the SDRs to work, and hopefully we get a Y set of opportunities.
Right.
Where the difference now is, what we want to do is let's take a look at that swarming of a people that's happening at the account level, right? Pass them on to the SDR. Maybe it's people that have scored up. Maybe it's not, right? Maybe it's a group of people that we want to pass over anyway, because that swarming thing that we're seeing at the top of the funnel could indicate that there's something going on there, right? And then I think what's also really important, what we advocate quite a bit, is don't just stop at top of funnel. There's a ton of signal that exists in your first party data, in your previous opportunities, right, where you've got buying committees that were defined on those, and start triangulating those 3 pieces of information together, where it's like, hey, Sydney, I know we had an evaluation last year. We couldn't get alignment on whatever it might be. I happen to notice that Bill and Amy were downloading some content. Oh yeah, we couldn't get alignment last year. It's now a priority again because we're still experiencing the problem. It's trying to confirm from multiple people that there is an initiative underway. And as we learned from Forrester, as those are passed over to sales, they close at much higher rates, bigger deal cycles, so on and so forth. So I think there's a lot of excitement in terms of doing that. But what do they say? Old habits die hard, right? It's really hard to make that move. Let's double click on that idea a little bit. The question would, why do you think it's hard for people to make that move? And just some additional thoughts on the buying groups.
Yeah. Well, so the one thing, when I think about MQLs, I think about noise, right? Yeah. When we send leads over too soon to sales, when the customers aren't yet ready to buy, it's noisy. They don't know what to prioritize, and then they lose faith in our ability to generate high quality opportunities. And so my point of view on this is absolutely, we want to accelerate hand raisers. So people that are coming with high, like, I want to talk to sales, I want pricing, whatever those hand raisers are, our job in that inbound motion is to make that process as fast as possible, like minutes to meetings. And when you do that, you can assess the interest of that person in that opportunity. Now, if we look back, there's probably a ton of signals even before when that person raised their hand. And we don't know if that person that's wanting to talk is actually the decision maker. That doesn't matter. Right. But make that meeting happen fast. Yep. Then, and I did this coming to G2, we were running an MQL model and I'm like, gotta go. So we put in an account-based model and an account-based approach. And so now we have account scores. And I'm a fan of like ABC, don't show them the score behind the scenes because you still want to be able to play around with that. So we're throttling the right amount of volume into the sales motion. And so the idea that, and we found this out in our own data, is that when you have executive alignment and more than 3 people in the buying cycle, our close rates are 44% higher. So you show that to the sales team. And then, I love the sales engagement platforms and how they've moved into deals and being able to see that level of involvement to be able to ensure that we are talking to everybody. And so the way that we action that, I've been at G2 for 7 months. And at our sales kickoff, we actually created engagement strategies for different segments. And so it's a model for SMB. For sure, we might get a founder that reaches out to us or a head of marketing, and it can be a 2-person close and a 1-person close even in those models. But if we're talking to mid-market or enterprise, that is completely different. Right. Now we have all these people involved. Where do you want to start? So we've identified 3 roles that are the buying roles. So like they have little dollar signs next to them, and understanding the relationship between customer marketing and product marketing and the head of demand gen and the CMO and the CRO, because the CRO actually cares about G2 signals because that's a high quality signal that their teams can action. Great. And so by putting that out there, like helping the team see like, oh, these are all the people I need to be engaging with in the account, and us starting to track that, like the number of contacts, makes a huge difference. Now I'm going to pivot for a second. What we also did at kickoff, which I think was really important, was introduce the personas to the company. So product needs to understand them, sales, marketing, we all need to understand our customers, our buyers, and our users, which could be different people and personas. And so we ran a whole persona workshop where we introduced, I think it was like 6 personas. We ran at the table this exercise where you had to guess. We gave out cards. I wish I had them as a visual here. We gave out cards, and so they read the persona, and then they had to give clues as to who they were, and they guessed at the table. And then we laid out the cards, and we gave them quotes that we had pulled out, real quotes from Gong, from each of those personas, and they had to match the quotes to the personas at their tables. And then we held a panel of a few of those buyer personas, and it was magic. It was as if we put the quotes from the people's mouths onto the table, and it was like the aha moment of like, oh my gosh, these are the relationships. So we really delved into the relationship between demand gen and product marketing, and how do we help facilitate that conversation? Or what would it take? We asked one of the gentlemen that was from marketing ops, what would it take for us to get you to introduce us to your CMO? And he was from a very large company. He's like, that would never happen. And so having our sales reps hear that was important. And the next day we did a C-level panel. So we actually had 7 customer panels at kickoff. It was awesome. But I think that really getting deep into understanding personas, their relationship between each other, so we know how to ask the contact that we are talking to today to introduce us to these other important people and really understanding how to do that. And even though the process may be not new to us, it is to sales reps,
Yeah.
right? Who are earlier in their career, who haven't gone through this before like we have. So
Yeah.
you still have to teach them.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to double click on something I mentioned in the introduction, which is how the playbooks are changing, right? Especially as SDR playbooks, where, a couple of years ago, somebody downloads a white paper or they listen to a webinar and we might be able to get that meeting. But as Mark Cosaglo coined the term, the great ignore, right? Because of the abuse of the sales engagement platforms using as these spam cannons. We're in this environment right now where people are just applying their mental spam filter to their inbox and going like not applicable, or the phone rings and they don't recognize the number, they're not picking it up. And that combined with the fact some of Sixth Sense's latest research was people are waiting about 70% of the way through to the buying cycle before they engage sales. So like, how do those playbooks change? And if we have to deliver, sort of meet people where they are, does that change the way in which we ask our SDRs to reach out and work? And should they be gold on meetings, or should those metrics change at all in this sort of environment that we're in right now?
Yeah. I can't help but, you mentioned Mark, then I have to quote the great Lars Nilsson of, you can only give quota to the SDRs on things they can control, which is meetings. So I do believe you would still want to do that. Now, meetings with multiple personas in the same account is still a meeting, right? So that can change, because if we do have a signal and we have one contact, the SDR getting more people in the buying committee into a conversation is a valuable part of the equation. So I do think that they should get credit for doing that in partnership with their account executive or account manager. It sounds simple, but it's hard. You have to deliver value. If you are sending an email, leaving a voicemail, sending a loom, a vidyard, whatever, it has to be high value. It has to be personalized. And if you don't take the time to do that, then it's spam and it's going to get filtered out. So how do you create that insightful aha moment where that can happen? Now, we're a little bit lucky because we sit on so much data.
Yeah.
So we can give insights to our prospects about traffic in their category, or what buyers in their category care about that we can see in the reviews that are left, or how their site compares to their competitor's site in terms of traffic and performance because they haven't set up their profile yet. So we can do that. We also have like 90-day look back offers. And so our offers and insights are highly valuable, but it takes time to create them. So I would recommend, how do you find those insights about your accounts, which is easier to do with AI and your own data set that teaches them something. And Kyle Porter used to say that all the time. If you're not teaching something to a customer in every conversation, then you're not doing your job. And so that takes a lot more skills. That's why account managers and SDRs need to not just run a process, but actually really deeply understand their market. I like the idea of hiring people from the market you sell into, and a relationship is immediately established and empathy can be established. So I think we are going to see that kind of a change.
Yeah. Let's talk about data, because we mentioned a minute ago. So what role does clean, complete data play in identifying and engaging key decision makers or key influencers across a buying group? And when I know data is such a broad term, right? Let's talk about first party, second party, third party, and then let's talk about operational data, right? So you are all a data provider, right? Maybe we talk about each one of those, how you see the different ones playing.
Yeah. And it's surprising, like a lot of people don't understand. They think intent is one thing, but it's so different, and the signals mean different things. Yeah. So the way that I think about it, and this is how I've been running my programs forever, as soon as there was a account-based in signals, like I think I was a buyer of it. And so the cool part about third-party signals, which are keywords that are associated with your personas and what you sell, that people are reading or searching on the internet, right? So we're capturing everybody in the internet that is part of our target account model. And so we know we can be more efficient with our ad spend dollars to try and capture those people. So that's the idea of the keywords. It's like, hey, there's a signal out there that a person in one of my target accounts, or I can build like lookalike accounts now, is researching on a topic that may or may not be relevant to what we sell. But let's try and warm them up. So that's the purpose of the account-based vendors, is like being able to distribute ads to those accounts to try and capture more of those people. And as soon as they start to see signals, then those signals create scores for which, connect to sales engagement platforms, whatever. But that's above the top of the funnel to top of the funnel.
Yep.
Where second party intent or signals play a role, which is like sites like G2, other second party sites, which I think of as an extension of your brand, as a company. So first party is your website, second party are places like G2. So you want to set up your profile on G2 as an extension of your website. If someone is there researching, you want to have all the information available that you would have in your website for people to do proper research. And then what we do is we parse those signals. So if somebody is on a category page, that's still a almost top of the funnel signal. So you know that they're not searching on a keyword, they're in your category. So they're doing research on your category against you and your competitors. And then the next signal is they come to your page. So now you know that they've come to your page. So your outreach for those, they're actually looking at your company, and you can connect that to a meaningful conversation. We saw that your company was doing research on G2 in this category, and you've looked at us like, let me tell you more.
Yep.
As why companies buy. So you can specify your communication to be more personalized. Now they do a compare. Like that is a hot signal. To me, I almost turn that into like an immediate signal to the SDRs, because not only are they looking at me, but I know who they're looking at. So I can tell an even better story. I saw someone from your company was researching sales off versus outreach. Let me tell you why sales off is better based on G2 reviews, right? And that's how I would parse that out.
Yep.
And then pricing page, I would communicate to them the same way as if they were a pricing page on your website. So the signals in second party data should have different actions. All of them should still go to your score, your account score, but I would treat and build specific workflows for each of those different signals. And then first parties there on your website, they could be still anonymized. So you're tracking them, you're trying to triangulate all this data. And there are some super smart people that can do that in some of these companies that I talk to now, but that we're connecting all those dots to show more and more people from this company are doing research, and therefore that score should increase.
Yep.
So your reps know like where to spend their valuable time.
Yep.
At the end of the day, time is your most precious asset. So if you can have more high quality accounts in pipeline and take out the noise, then there is time for personalization in the communication.
Yep. Let's talk about noise for a moment. So there are so many signals that are available today. Each individual signal by themselves don't necessarily mean anything. It's the packaging of signals that give us an insight. And so what are your thoughts on that in terms of what to look for? Are there certain types of signals that you would want to package together that would signal like more of a hot lead as opposed to others?
Yeah. So there's volume and quality, and all of them should go into whatever scoring model you use, if it's an account-based platform or different scoring models. So you want to put everything into those. And then, yes, absolutely. Like certain keywords could have a higher value than other keywords, and how that aligns to a persona or a problem. And I think I kind of spoke to that in terms of the different types of signals. So specifically for G2 signals, I want to like hone in on compare and pricing. And I would create specific workflows for those. Compare, I could put into my compete campaign. And so take all the contacts from that account and put them into my compete campaign and start to do specific advertising against that competitor set. And then pricing page, that to me is like an immediate hot lead for the SDR to start chasing, or the account exec to start chasing. If they're at pricing, they're bottom of funnel. And there's just like, if you're not already talking to them, you're second, which then you're going to have to work even harder. And that's why I was talking earlier, Randy, about speed, because the person that gets to those accounts first has a higher chance of winning as well. We've seen data on that as well. And so you want to be that first influencer, that first trusted advisor. And so marketing's job is to create velocity in the funnel.
Yep. So there's a big debate going on LinkedIn, right, around how do you build brand versus how do you drive demand, and
how do you capture demand? Yeah.
How do you capture demand? Exactly. And everybody is kind of short term, the quarter, right, and the immediate pipeline. But as we talked about before, to be in the consideration set, they have to know who you are. And so brand is still very important. We'd love to get your perspective on that, as far as how should we be thinking about how we spend our money on brand versus what we spend our money on for demand gen, and why the two are so important.
Yeah. So we do an annual buyer behavior report at G2. And what we found is the short list is shrinking. So year to year, it's gone from an average of 7 to only 3 making the shortlist. So when you think about brand and leadership, which is always my number one priority as a marketing leader, I want to be the leader, so I make the shortlist. And that's our job to get that acknowledgement, which I've always used G2 to do that. And so that gets you invited to the party when they're doing all the research. The long-term strategy of brand, I really believe that the earlier you invest in brand, which is hard to convince teams that don't have a lot of money, but it's the early stage investment that's going to pay out on the long run. And because if your brand is known, you have a sense of community, you're going to be in the mind when people are like associating problem to company, or you're being talked about in the peer circle. So when we go back to that buying network, like you want to be talked about, and that's brand. So what the difference of that action is as a marketer is you're giving something away without asking for anything in return. Mm-hmm. Where demand capture is you're sharing something, but you're trying to capture a contact. And those are different motions. There's different strategies of how you set your campaigns up to do that. And there's different conversations based on thought leadership, which is top of the funnel brand awareness plays, versus specific webinars, which would be a demand capture potentially play. Right. So the program mix changes in there too. Yeah. And you can't do it early enough. And when you're building out, and I've built out many brands and rolled them out, you want to make sure that you're investing enough upfront that you're comfortable with and your leadership team is comfortable with, this is who we are and how we're going to talk about ourselves for the next 5 years. It takes that long.
Yeah. Going back to buying groups for a moment and thinking about ABM, I think there's a lot of people think that they may be doing a buying group motion by just doing ABM. And I think I've heard you say it in the past, and you kind of challenge traditional ABM, right? Instead of looking at the individual accounts, if I'm understanding or paraphrasing correctly, we should be focusing on segments and segments that are triangulated around a couple of different data points, right? Can you share a little bit more about what your thoughts are there?
You were listening to me talk to Craig Rosenberg. So yes, first of all, I wouldn't even call it ABM. I think it's an account-based strategy. So I'm in the account-based strategy for go-to-market teams camp these days because it is an alignment. And so once the go-to-market team, which is in my mind, marketing, sales, and product, where we've identified what are those growth opportunities, who is our ICP, you can start to break down the ICP into different segments. And so we are creating smaller lists of companies based on different parameters so we can have more meaningful communications with them. So an example of that would be, hey, we partner with 6 Sense and Demandbase, the 2 leading account-based platforms on the market. But if I create a segment for companies, security companies that use 6 Sense that are not yet our customers, I can craft a storyline that is way more specific to that segment that is meaningful, and maybe have an offer and an expert and a customer story there. So I'm not having a generic conversation, I'm having a specific conversation, which might be different than me saying 6 Sense customers that are in finance and also have Bombora. So I can use those data points plus a persona you'd mix them to really craft something that's more meaningful. So that's how I think about segments, is like, how can I tell a story to that segment? Which again, I'm trying to teach them something they don't already know. And so how do I do research that's specific to that? How do I tell customer stories that are specific to that? How do I understand the problem set that's specific to those customers? Because people who buy demand-based are different than people who buy 6 Sense. And there's a reason they pick one versus the other. So that's how I think about segments.
Yeah. What I love about that is with the segment is, to go back to what we said earlier, like, we have to give them something that creates value. It's just on the brand side, like, what is valuable, and giving them a point of view. And this kind of goes back to your speed thing, right? If we can get the first one in there and give them a really interesting point of view that we're helping shape the requirements maybe a little bit, or at least the way that they think about things. So I love the idea in the shift on traditional ABM versus segment. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, and segment could be a campaign too, like when you line it up, or like vertical is a really good example there too. So
yeah. So with the decline of MQLs as being the primary success metric, how do you think marketing teams should rethink KPIs, right? I don't want to lead the question, but should there be such a thing as marketing KPIs and sales KPIs, or should there just be like one common set of KPIs that they're outcome focused and everybody should be driving towards those? So just would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I think you absolutely have to have shared metrics. I think marketing's goals and jobs should be pipeline and closed won revenue and retention, the same goals that sales has, and you share a portion of it. So in our pipeline meetings, which we run bi-weekly, we report on the same data set and from the same reports. And those tend to be like meeting booked opportunity, like in that bottom of funnel to opportunity management stages. And I like the idea of talking about stages. Outside of that meeting, I'm going to still speak marketing, right? Not in the pipeline meeting. So with my teams, of course, we're still looking at website traffic, organic, number of leads and contacts, not MQLs. I'm just gonna call them leads and contacts for today, people who are engaging with our programs. And then I'm also hyper focused on velocity as it relates to inbound. And I don't need to have that conversation in pipeline. That is marketing ops, demand gen conversations all day long. Performance marketing, if you want to put it there. But no, we sign up for pipeline. We sit right next to sales and feeling ownership of it. I always say too, like in past lives, that's not as much as now, like never stop marketing, right? The further they get into the funnel, the more marketing you should be doing. When they're at stage 3 and in making decisions, there should be a person on that buying committee that is not seeing something from us every day that's of value, getting invited to things. Deal acceleration at that stage has even incrementally higher value. And when you build your models, understanding what does a percentage change mean into the top of the funnel versus a percentage change mean, let's say at stage 0 conversion, which is just the sweet spot pool of like companies that are not being followed up on correctly. And if I can change that by 5%, what does that mean in terms of impact to revenue? And those are the kinds of conversations that I like to have because we can attack those. So really important, Randy, when we're thinking about pipeline meetings, and if you're not having a pipeline meeting with marketing and sales and SDRs in the room, start it today. And the purpose of the pipeline meeting should be to identify areas that you can address and fix. It's not a readout meeting. It's what does our pipeline funnel look like? And where are the opportunity areas that we have to improve conversion, speed up leads, where's things getting stuck, and let's go address and attack those as a team. And so you want to remove the stigma of people like, oh no, I don't want no, we want the bad stuff. We can't fix it if we don't know. And so that to me is the purpose of a pipeline meeting. Yeah.
What you said is so important earlier, which is we should be marketing to people harder middle of the funnel. Not only that, we should know how many engaged contacts it takes for us to win a deal, right? And let's just say that there's 8 people on the buying committee, and we know that if we can get 6 of them on a deal, our chances of winning that deal go up 15%. Well, now let's go look at the current pipe. Which ones do we have and which ones don't we have?
Right.
And let's go to marketing's job at that point is to go deliver those engaged stakeholders on those opportunities.
Exactly. Or put programs together where we partner with sales. Like virtual events, super easy to do. Like everybody that's in a stage 2 should be invited to a virtual event, and we run them every other week, right? Like just a programmatic approach for getting engagement, getting more people from those accounts involved in discussions and building relationships. Because at the end of the day, that's what they buy. Especially when you have like-to-like software, they buy it from people and people they like. And that's not going to go away in the age of AI. So how do we help craft the opportunity to build relationships?
So let's pick on the problem. And when I say pick on it, I'm going to pick on both of our old companies here. So one of the big challenges that companies have to be able to put that together, to understand how many engaged stakeholders I need to have on a deal to increase win rates, is you have to have that on the opportunity record inside of Salesforce. Right? Too many tools across the sales and marketing tech stack only write a little bit of information into Salesforce, and they keep a lot of information contained to their own UI because they want to drive people toward their UI as opposed to being sales. But yet, when we look at like marketing automation systems, when we look at ABM, like they all need good, clean data on opportunities in order to feed those programs. And so we've got these data silos across the sales and marketing tech stack. So how do we overcome that?
I believe RevOps owns data. And I have given up Uncle, I always said I want marketing ops to sit in marketing. I'm cool with marketing ops sitting in revenue operations. And we're working on our next buyer behavior report right now. And it's really insightful. We're presenting it at SaaStr. Where does the buying center change in the age of AI? And it's kind of swinging back to IT. And I think go-to-market teams need to fortify their revenue operations teams to be that center that IT trusts, so we can still maintain control and management of our systems. I don't want it going back to IT, right? We need to have that. So there needs to be trust built between, there needs to be shared understanding and oversight, especially it relates to purchasing AI, but that revenue operations needs to own and manage the data, which is the gold that we have access to. And again, in this age, there's no reason now you can't go back and get that data cleaned up. There's so many tools out there and so many contact providers. And like, if they're in your target account list, like at least in tier 1 and tier 2, you should 100% have that completely built out with all the contact, up-to-date contacts of your personas that are in the buying committee. Yeah. No excuse for having that. Now, if you want to go to tier 3, and you can go further and further, but no excuse not to have that core data there, because again, it's about time. I don't want to waste time sending emails to people that aren't in a job anymore. I don't want to waste effort sending emails to people that don't exist. Yeah. And so that cleanliness. And the second piece on that, Randy, is that's what AI gets trained on. Right. And so we're all excited about agents, but if you have bad data, it's not going to be trained on it, and it's going to do the wrong things. You have to make a commitment and set your own quality to your data that is aligned to how you manage the performance of your teams and how you're going to build up your agents. Yeah. So it's critical. It's not an option.
There was a great session that I sat on. I forget his last name, but he's the analyst at Forrester that covers data. And he was talking about how it's so hard to prove the value of data, right? So data is sort of this thing that sits under a little bit. It doesn't necessarily drive revenue. And it's like, yes, it does. We just have to think about how it drives revenue, right? And that was such an interesting presentation that he gave. So I want to be cognizant of time. We're having a pretty rich discussion and talk about a few other things, but I'd love to understand from you. So we talked about KPIs, we talked about different metrics. I want to talk a little bit about alignment. What are the struggles that most companies have in making this shift away from the individual leads to an opportunity-based marketing motion or a buying group motion? Is we can't get the right alignment. Why do you think alignment is such a struggle for most leaders?
Oh, that's really, I think where it's like role and responsibility, hard definitions and SLAs, and everybody's supposed to do their different job, and like trying to pull all those teams together in a coordinated fashion it's not easy. Yeah. It's not easy, right? So the mechanics and orchestration of opportunity management. I was in a session that Seth Mars was running, the Forrester analyst. He was picking up the lack of trust between sales and marketing and why that exists. Yeah, are you? Okay, yeah, it was great. And so how do you build trust? Well, you have to know each other. You have to have shared goals. You have to be in the trenches together, like we do Pipe Gen Tuesdays together. His whole model of SLA, and if it's not being worked, like how do you get that passed back to somebody who has capacity to work it, and the sales rep having confidence that the SDR can go work that opportunity or the stage 0 to maybe a stage 1. Yeah. I think that's great, right? Your SDRs are your future sales leaders. So maybe they get passed to an acceleration team. I worked with a company in the security space that had like 4 different types of SDRs. They had the inbound, they had outbound, they had revival, and they had working. And it really created that next stage for SDRs to make that progression into their future sales role. Yeah. I think just really thinking through the processes and systems, because anything that's sitting there past your SLA date is just getting stale and old, and some other company's working it. Yep. Some other company's working it because they're not just talking to one company. Right. So if you think about that, like, oh my gosh, those opportunities or stage 0 leads that are sitting there, if you're not working it, somebody else is, and it's not going to be your deal. Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the other things about alignment that's a challenge is this whole idea around marketing sourced, marketing influenced, right? Ultimately attribution, right? Yeah. Attribution is such a controversial topic. People believe in it, they hate it. There's different types of attribution. What in this, buying group motion or buying group world, what are your thoughts on attribution as a metric? I mean, the reason it has to be measured is because you have to understand what investments are working and what are not. And so I think that's how I think about attribution. I think about attribution by program type. What does it cost me? in this program to generate somebody that is engaging with us, a lead? And how do those programs differentiate against each other? How do I evaluate programs like trade shows? Like certain trade shows are a different cost than others. And so I know which ones to continue to invest in and which ones I don't, because I know what the average cost per lead is by that program type. So that's important to know just from an investment strategy. When it comes to sourced, yes, I know. And there's so many different ways to measure it. And I think of it as like, it's a data point, not to be spoken of in the pipeline meeting, but understanding what are the most effective programs for first touch? Like, what is the tipping point activities that work? What is the last touch conversion program? And how do I compare those? Those are all important. And if they're marketing or sales or partner, it's good to understand where those things happen. But in my mind, it's like looking at influence. It's looking at the amount of touches it takes and the partnership between all these teams.
That's right.
Because that's when it wins, right? Yeah. If everybody's aligned on the motion and there's a partner angle, there's a marketing angle and a sales angle that is coordinated, those are teams that win.
Yeah. Yeah. I think of course, marketing's got to do their touch points and run the programs, and sales is constantly reaching out. But who actually landed the person on the opportunity really shouldn't matter. It should, because it's the combination of those things. It's the multiple touch points. It's the multiple phone calls the SDR did that ultimately got the person on there. And that's where I think
amount of activities per opportunity, like across, and then breaking that down as how many were marketing, how many were sales, how many were partner. That's an interesting data point.
That's right.
And to run data, and they're like, this is why I love data, right? Running data sets against, like, when you have a partner, like we do this too, when you have a partner involved in the deal, it has a 25% higher chance of closing. Like, those are good data points. So your reps are like, do I have a partner on the deal? I don't have a partner on the deal. I need to get a partner on the deal, right?
Yeah.
That's what they should be thinking about. Yeah.
All right, Sydney, let's transfer over to our lightning round, which is a little bit more personal. Okay. And it's just kind of rapid fire questions, and maybe we'll do 3 or 4. We got time for 3 or 4. So I know that you are a big advocate for constantly learning and having a learning mindset. Where do you turn to for inspiration, or where do you stay abreast and updated on the current things going on in the market?
My network, we have like a CMO AI club we just started. We meet monthly. I get inspiration from there. And our executive advisory boards, like other networking events, I come to learn and be inspired. And so I just wouldn't be where I am without my network currently. So people inspire me.
Yep. I listened to one of your podcasts where you said if you weren't a marketing leader, you would be a barista. So what is your go-to coffee drink?
My go-to coffee drink currently is a venti iced Americano with half sugar-free vanilla. So sugar-free, half pump vanilla. And at a place called Indian Wells Coffee in Palm Springs area, it is thebomb.com. So that's my go-to. Or if I'm in the Bay Area, then it's Phil's, and it's called a Silken Splendor with a dash of cinnamon in the filter.
I might have to take that to my local place and have them make it. All right. You talked a little bit about a period in your career where you were experiencing some personal burnout. I also experienced that at a certain point in my career as well. And so I'm curious, what is it that you were feeling, and what advice might you give to others who are also feeling that?
This isn't a rapid fire question. I think the feeling of burnout is like where you just can't get excited about things that you should be excited about. You should be excited about. Like the joy is you just don't have the energy to tap into anymore. And I think I can look back and know exactly the point in time where the switch flipped for me. So yeah.
Okay, I'll go back to rapid fire. Favorite part about your job?
Talking to customers at G2. Like I have a gift that I get to speak to peers and again learn from peers, teach them what G2 can do. Like they think of it as a review site, and we're so much more. So that's it.
There's always a flip side to that question. Least favorite, or a different way to ask it would be like the hardest part of your job.
I think the hardest part is always alignment, really making sure that the leadership team is aligned and in sync, and that we have the courage to call each other out in a non-abrasive way. Like, I believe in Patrick Lencioni, and like the trust has to be there so we can hold each other accountable. And if we veer away from that, then we're not at our high potential. Yeah,
love that. Okay, last question. What advice might you give someone early in their career who want to be in your role someday?
I would still balance life with work. I think living a full life, and too often in my earlier career, I put work before life. And I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that. I would live your life. Take weekends to do things that make you healthy and happy. Fall in love, have kids, do whatever you want, have dogs. But just make sure that you invest in you and your happiness, because it will actually make you a better leader and further into your career. Don't give up, work hard, but also live.
Balance it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Only someone who has kind of lived that can actually say, right? So it's truly wisdom. So
yeah.
Well, Sydney, I appreciate your time today. It was a really great episode, just knowledge dropping across everything marketing and buying group. So thank you so much. That is another episode for the Revenue Lounge. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Take care. Have a great day.